Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Earthly Delights podcast. This week we have Kiana Fitzgerald as the guest, and Kiana Fitzgerald is an American journalist, podcaster, DJ, and mental health awareness advocate. I actually linked up with her nearly a year ago after I read her fantastic piece on Kanye West's public statements surrounding his bipolar diagnosis and how this unveiling was very important for her own development. She's subsequently written a few more pieces, which you can find in the links below. But recently, she's had a very active social media presence, which she uses to share her personal experience of bipolar and to destigmatize non-ordinary states of consciousness. Hearing her take on episodes of mania is something I find fascinating and beautiful, and I think you guys also will. She describes these episodes as portals towards a deeper truth, and touching this truth has made her feel closer to God and eradicating a fear of death. But we cover a lot in this podcast, and Kiana's honesty around this still misunderstood condition will certainly help expand one's understanding. Thanks for listening, guys. Any feedback is always welcome. All the best.
Kiana Fitzgerald, welcome to the podcast. What's the crack?
Thank you for having me. The crack is I am just making it. Each day is a fun one. Each day is an anxious one. But I'm trying to make the best of it, whatever I do.
Happy to hear. That's all we can do. Just make the best of it. I particularly appreciate American responses to What's the Crack. Just a few weeks ago, we had Mary Jane Rubinstein on, and for the first time, I heard an American reply to What's the Crack with like a rating, which so always on my toes. But also, before we get into it, I wanted to ask Fitzgerald: is there some Irish in your lineage?
I knew you were going to ask that. And I was like sitting here right before we spoke, and I was like, I should have looked this up. I have no idea. But yeah, I've been told my entire life, yeah, you have like my other side of my family is the McKnights. So yeah, I don't know what it is, but it's there somewhere.
Okay. It's there. That's the main thing. You can feel it.
Yeah.
Great. I guess just for listeners, just to begin, I reached out to you following a piece that you wrote on Kanye West's bipolar, and the public discourse around that. And we've been corresponding on and off the last while, discussing perception of bipolar and mental health more broadly, to the actual
Mhm.
experience of mania, as well as your recent work destigmatizing bipolar on TikTok, which we'll get to.
Yes.
And it's great to finally get you onto the podcast. But before we get into the chunk of what we want to talk about today, do you mind telling ourselves a bit about yourself, particularly for listeners who might not be familiar?
Absolutely. So, yeah, my name is Kiana Fitzgerald, and I am from Texas, a small town called Seguin, which is not far from San Antonio, which is where I'm currently living. And I am a journalist. I am an essayist. I DJ from time to time. I try to do a lot of things just to kind of keep myself busy. And but the thing that I focus on the most is writing. And Jim, as you said, I wrote this piece about Kanye West in late 2019, and it just kind of broke open the doors for me in a lot of ways. It introduced me to people like yourself, and also folks who also live with bipolar disorder, like me, like Kanye. And it gave me an opportunity to really just be honest about my experiences in a way that I hadn't been able to be before. And by that, I mean, I was diagnosed, and we'll get into this a little later, but I had my first manic experience in 2016. And for the next 2 or 3 years, I felt like I didn't know what had happened. And I felt like nobody understood me, and I felt like I was alone. And after I wrote that article, I just realized that I was far from alone, that there were so many people who had experienced the same thing that I had or very similar to what I had. And it just gave me the motivation to continue speaking out, being vocal about mental health, and especially trying to destigmatize what we call mental illness.
That's great, Kiana. Thanks for that introduction. The first question I wanted to ask was, you mentioned your first manic episode was in 2016. Can I ask, how was your general mental health, or your health generally before that?
Oh yeah, before that, I was quote unquote normal. I was just living a very it was an exciting life. I had moved to New York City. I was working this job and then I quit that job and I hopped over to another job. Then I quit that job. So it was a lot of like, in hindsight, it was kind of erratic behavior because I just couldn't hold a job. And I was just like, I just want to be free. I want to do what I want to do. And I essentially, I was trying to just live the life of the people around me and trying to be like the next big writer in New York City. I'm like from the small town in Texas and I had made it to New York. So I wanted to make the best of it. And I was doing the best that I could, but eventually I just had stress compounded upon stress. And that's what led to the first experience. But yeah, before that, it was just, me living a really fun life. And I kind of had no idea what was coming for me.
And can you talk us through the first episode? Like, where were you and how did it happen? What happened immediately after it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first episode started to creep in, I would say around, honestly, like I felt it around my birthday, which was August 14th. And I had just turned 27. I'm 31 now, and I'm going to turn 32 in about a month. But yeah, it was just like a very tumultuous time, even though I just said that like before that it was a lot of fun and I was flitting around the city and doing what I wanted to do. I was also going through it in a lot of ways. I was dating someone who said that they were going to do this, but they did that, and I was falling apart. And I had quit the jobs that I had just mentioned, and I had to move apartments. So I was just stressed beyond stressed. And I just kind of tried to work my way through it by praying and crying. And that's all I did. I just cried and I prayed nonstop. And eventually one day, it just kind of, I woke up and it felt like I just had this sense of peace come over me, and like this spiritual, very, very intense peace that I had never felt before. And I basically was, it felt like God had reached out and was like, hey, I'm here for you. You don't have to be afraid. Like, you don't have to experience this alone. So this was around September, that things started to ramp up. And I ended up flying home for a funeral from New York to Texas. And my sister could tell that something was different about me because I was speaking very, very spiritually. I was being very, as they say, what's the word? Not hippy dippy, but it's like kind of in that frame of mind of feeling like you just are
New
one with the
agey.
universe. Yeah, new age. Yeah. Definitely that. I was just out there and she was like, what's going on? Like, is everything okay with her? And I flew back to New York and I was, just engaging in this very open communication with the universe and with the people around me and feeling like I was just, not the chosen one because I wasn't that arrogant in that moment. But I was definitely feeling like feeling like God was speaking to me. So yeah, I ended up not being able to move into the apartment that I was supposed to because they could see that something was off with me as well. So I ended up moving in with the person that I was dating. And from there, long story short, I ended up going missing because he had to go to work and he couldn't look after me. So he was like, hey, just go get something to eat from the deli next door, come back, and I'll be home later. And of course, I tried to go get something to eat and I didn't want to pay for it because Jesus paid it all. And I was like, I'm not paying for this. So I left my purse in the deli and I left. And I guess the deli cashier thought that I was joking. So he just let me go. And I ended up going into the building next door and like trying to knock on doors and save people and tell them God has returned. We're here. We're okay. We're okay. And, of course, they were like, what's wrong with this girl? So they ended up calling the mental health police or the police. I'm not sure if it was mental health specific, but some form of police was called on me. And they took me to the hospital. And my family and friends had no idea where I was. So I was considered missing for about 36 hours.
Wow. There's a lot I want to ask now. I guess,
Sure.
and so after the mental health police came, what was your experience like then? Did you spend time in a hospital, and was what the doctors or what the hospital were saying completely at odds to as your explanation for what you were experiencing?
Yeah. So the police picked me up, they put me in an ambulance, and they took me to a hospital in the Bronx, which is the area that I was already in. And I remember things here and there, but I just know that I was there for 5 weeks. And toward the end of the stay, my family got more and more upset because they weren't being told what had happened and what the diagnosis was. If anything, like, this is, like, trigger warning, but they at one point called my brother and told him that I had died by suicide. So it was just like a really messed up hospital. It was very, very inadequate in a lot of ways. But that's where I was for a little over a month. And yeah, like I said, the doctors didn't give me a diagnosis. They just put me on this medication called risperidone or Risperdal. And it was, I was drugged up. I couldn't, like, whenever I could get through to my family, I sounded very sluggish. I couldn't make complete sentences. I would repeat myself. It was just like a lot of sad confusion. So yeah, it was and what they were telling me in the hospital um didn't make sense because I felt like I had this spiritual transformation, this evolution, and they were telling me, you're ill, you need to stay here because something isn't right with your brain chemistry and we're going to figure it out. So I was experiencing this one thing in this arm, and then in this other arm it felt like I just couldn't comprehend what they were trying to tell me.
Kiana, how long did it take you to get your actual diagnosis from that point where you were in the hospital and, like you said, you were just like drugged up for however long? How long did it take from that point till actually finding out that you had bipolar disorder?
Sure. It took a year. I came out of the hospital without a diagnosis. I was just kind of sent with some pills and told, take these for the rest of your life. And we don't know what it is, but just deal with it. So I ended up coming home to Texas after being in that hospital, and I was here for a couple of months, and I just got antsy. And I was like, I don't want to be here. I need to go back to work. I need to go back to the East Coast and like live my life. So I ended up getting this fellowship. And I traveled from Texas to DC, and I lived there for about 6 months doing this fellowship. And during that time, it's kind of gross, but it's the honest truth. The medication made me break out into a full body rash. And it was one of the most difficult times of my life because I was dealing with this mental condition. And then I was also dealing with this very physical reaction. So I would go to hospitals, I would go to doctors and explain, like, this is happening. What can we do? And because I didn't have insurance, they were like, well, we can't do anything without a primary care physician, and they can't do anything without the psychiatrist's approval. So it was just like this loop that I was running around. So I was like, you know what? F this. I'm not going to take these meds anymore. So I stopped. And that was around July. And at that time, I got the job that I moved to New York again for. And that was at this hip hop publication, and it was based in Manhattan. So I was excited. I had this job that I was really crazy about. And like I said, that was around July that I started. And then by the next few months in October, I had another episode. And that's when I was sent to another hospital and told very explicitly, you have bipolar type 1. And that's when I was like, oh, okay, now I know what happened.
Was that a relief for you to like
Kiana,
finally
can
be
I
given
ask?
like a name?
Yeah, it was. It was definitely a relief because I knew what to search for now. Like, I'm a journalist. I love researching. I love investigating things, and I just wanted to get to a point where I could better understand this thing that is hovering over my life that I have no like previously I had no foundation, no basis of understanding it. And then once I was told, hey, Kiana, it's this, then I was like, oh, okay, well, let me sit down and do my Googles. Let me like reach out to other people who might have it. Let me like backtrack in my memory and remember people in my history or in my family who may have had it as well. So yeah, it was definitely like, it just opened the door for me to be able to get down to the nitty gritty of what it was.
Were you scared when you were told? I mean, obviously there's the part of the relief, but then also because through our conversations and through our own experiences, most people, unless they've had kind of a direct experience with bipolar disorder, either personally or through a family member or friend, most people have kind of these misconceptions about what
Mhm.
bipolar disorder actually is. So were you in that boat, or were you quite savvy with what that meant from the get-go, or did it scare you because you might have had some misconceptions or ideas about what potentially this disorder might mean for you going forward?
I think it was a little bit of both, because I do have family members who live with bipolar and schizophrenia and that kind of thing. So I had an understanding of what it looked like from a familial perspective, but I didn't understand what it looked like for me. So, like, for example, my brother has schizoaffective disorder. And for him, like, he sees hellacious things. He sees, like, he'll think that he hurt somebody, or he'll think, very, very harsh and graphic things. And I go in the opposite direction. And I was like coming to the understanding that this looks different for everybody, even within the same family. So I had like some preconceptions about, okay, like I know what it's like for him and I know what it's like for, XYZ on the internet, but what does it look like for me? So it was really about the lived experience of going through it and processing it in my own time and figuring out, okay, this is what it is. Let's see what Kiana, like, how she can manage this condition because, as I've said, it is lifelong and that is a little daunting at times, but it is what it is. I don't regret being diagnosed. I don't regret the experiences that I've had because they have been life changing in a lot of ways.
Kiana, you're very descriptive. Or you describe two words very effectively, at least for me, your experience of mania. But before we get to that, I would love to just ask about, you mentioned this is a lifelong condition, but you had 26 or nearly 27 years where you didn't
Mm.
have at all or any symptoms of what perceived to be bipolar. So is it your
Mhm.
understanding, or is it the general medical consensus that like you have bipolar, and that it's just certain events that may trigger a certain episode or certain mania, and then the mania is how very often we get to like write it in stone, okay, this person may have this
Mhm.
bipolar? Or
Yeah.
is it that you are born and then certain events may push you in the direction of being diagnosed with bipolar?
Sure. So I want to be transparent about the fact that I was hospitalized at age 8 for an episode of psychosis. At that time, I wasn't sure, my family wasn't sure what had happened, but they knew that I wasn't myself. And they like sent me to the hospital for about a week or two, and we just kind of kept rolling. They sent me home with medication. My mom didn't want me on the meds, and I just kind of kept living my life. So from 8 to 27, there was no disruption. There was no like peaking up of mania or anything like that that I can recall. It was a very, very standard life. And yeah, so it was definitely something that happened when I was younger that could be connected to now. But for the most part, it's like, obviously it's genetics for sure, but stress is like the number one factor for me. And the thing is, like, I had been stressed the majority of my life, living in poverty, being in grad school, like all that stuff. Like, I had been met with stress many times before. So it was really interesting that it popped up when it did. But I also know that certain like elements like age are factors, like for women and for people in general. I think it can be very noticeable in your mid to late 20s.
Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate your honesty there. Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so for listeners, for myself and Seb, for people who are interested as to what constitutes mania? What does it feel like? I know
Mhm.
you can only speak for you, or I know you have a very close friend who also has bipolar. But could you describe what the experience is like, and what you take from it? I know you mentioned before, after you wanted to knock on doors and tell everybody it's okay, Jesus come and it's safe. But
Mhm.
can you describe the actual experience?
Yeah. Um, so as you said, I can only speak for myself. I don't want to, ruffle feathers out there of anybody who's had a negative experience with mania. But for me, it's an all-encompassing joy. It's very, very it's one of the most natural things I've ever felt in my life. And that's why it's incredibly disorienting when you sit down with a medical professional and they tell you that this is wrong, because it feels like the most right thing in the world. It feels like I have come into the person that I was always meant to be, that I'm living the life that I was always meant to live. The sun shines brighter, the air feels cleaner. The It feels like you're having a conversation with the universe as you're talking to a friend, or you're looking at a tree, or you're listening to music or anything. Like, it feels like everything is connected. And in some moments of mania, it has felt like I've cycled in and out of God consciousness, meaning like I have not been able to differentiate myself from God, and feeling like, wow, I created all this, knowing that I haven't, but feeling like I have. Like, that feeling is what it is. And I think that's something that can't really be described to a medical professional. I've tried, and unfortunately, most of those attempts have been in a manic state, so they didn't believe me. But it's that's why I write about it so much, and that's why I started this TikTok about it, because I want people to understand that, like, when your loved one is going through a manic episode, they're the happiest likely that they've ever been in their life, and they don't want to come out of that. We don't want to come back to this reality, because the what we're going through right now is incredibly difficult, and especially for Black Americans, for Black women, for queer Black people. Like, there's so much that we're going through that when you take somebody out of that, they don't want to go back. So that's why when people ask me, like, how can I get my cousin or my brother or my husband to take his medication, I'm like, they have to want that for themselves. They have to get to the point of feeling like they have grown past that moment of mania, and then felt like, I've learned what I needed to learn from that. Let me move on with life as it was.
And Kiana, do you? I mean, we've spoken about the manic episodes, but obviously with bipolar disorder, there's two sides of the coins. Have you ever experienced the depressive episodes? And if so, like, what? How do they kind of manifest themselves, and what do they feel like for you?
Yeah. So depression is something for me that is inevitable, especially after mania. And the higher I go up in mania, the lower I come down in depression. So the first manic experience that I had was, like I said, it started around my birthday in August, and it didn't really end until November. So after that, I had a depressive episode that lasted from about November to about June of the following year. And it was a very arduous time. It was very difficult. And like a majority of the time that I was going through that depression, I was living in DC, and it was the winter, and it was just terrible. Like, I was living in this basement apartment. It had very little light. I was going through the skin rash thing. I couldn't sleep. My brain felt fried. It was a very difficult transition for me. And in general, when I do go through depressive episodes, it's very much it just feels like I have nothing to live for, like I don't know why I'm here. Like, I don't feel that connection anymore that I felt in mania. And I'm sitting here wondering every day, like, why am I not connected anymore? What did I do wrong? And that's how it manifests for me. I know it's different for everyone else, but for me, it's definitely like, like, this is my reality now. And I had this very, very intense, intentional connection to a different form of reality that is way beyond anything I've ever experienced here. So how can I get, it's always like, how can I get back there? How can I get back there? Like, it's just a time of longing, very, very deep longing.
Kiana, you seem to be in a better place in terms of managing the high and the low. I
Mhm.
wonder, how was that process for you? Obviously, you mentioned it was a sense of longing, but you mentioned that was the time in DC. But now it seems that you, I guess what I'm asking is like, have you managed to decipher what you need to do when you are experiencing the lows to kind of combat that kind of, oh, but I was touching something more beautiful, more truthful
Mhm.
than I was here, and I want to get back there. But do you have you developed practices, or is there something that you can do on a day to day basis that obviously doesn't bring you close to that special that feeling, but something that keeps you going in a decent place?
Absolutely. I am very open with my family and friends about what I'm feeling. My brother is very understanding because he's experienced mania and he knows, what it feels like to go all the way up like that. My sister is very empathetic, and she is someone who uh, is willing to listen to me even when she doesn't understand what I'm talking about. And that's a very important thing, I feel, for a lot of people who go through what I call alternative states of consciousness. Is it's important for us to be able to talk about what we're going through, because when we're sitting here and we're like in our own brains and we're just like, how can I make sense of this? How can I make sense of this? That's when I start to spiral into depression because I feel alone and I feel isolated. But when I can talk to my family and my friend that I mentioned, or I don't know if we've discussed her yet, but yeah, we have weekly conversations about, the things that we've experienced and the things that we know to be true in our hearts, but aren't necessarily accepted by the general public yet. So it helps to have people to talk to. I also do a lot of journaling. I was journaling before we started speaking. I'm going to journal later today. I'm going to journal tomorrow. Like, it's something that I just have to do. And I also try to meditate when I can. It's not like something that's fully embedded in me yet because for some reason I'm like, oh, I have to do this. I have to do this. I can't meditate. And it's like, Kiana, it's 5 minutes. It's 10 minutes. You can do it. So that's something that I'm trying to implement as well. And yeah, music. I'm a big fan of music. And that's what keeps me going on a day to day basis.
You brought up the music there, and I wanted to ask you. I mean, I know you've done some pieces about Kanye West, and obviously he brought out an album called Yay that kind of touches on his bipolar disorder. And I know, like, maybe critics don't think it's one of his best albums, but it's kind of my go-to album if I'm going to listen to Kanye West. I don't know why, but for some reason I kind of
Mm,
really gravitate to it. How did that album impact
interesting.
you? How did you see it? Did you see it as a good work? Did you see it as representative? Or yeah, I'd be interested to see how you think about it.
Yeah. So when the album came out, I was working for the hip hop publication that I mentioned before. And they knew already that I was bipolar because the episode that I had in 2017, I was working and I was in the office and they saw that I was not myself. So when I came back to the office, I was just very transparent about the fact that I had bipolar type 1. Sometimes I go high, sometimes I go low, blah, 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 whatever. So by the time the album came out, everybody already knew that I was bipolar. So the night before I went into work, when it dropped, like, because the way it was, the album came out on a Friday, but that previous day, Kanye had this like listening session that everybody could tune into through this certain app. And on the second track of Yikes, Kanye says, that's my bipolar, that's my superpower. It's not a disability. I'm a superhero. And I like screamed. I was like, oh my God, like, I can't believe he just said this. And so the next day, the album actually dropped, and we could see clear as day on the cover, I hate being bipolar. It's awesome. And that's when I was like, okay, when I get to work, I'm going to have to answer some questions. And so, of course, they call a meeting. There are like 10, 15 people in this room, and they're all looking at me. And I'm like, okay, all right, here we go. So I just tried to explain to them, like, these are the reasons why Kanye may have said, I hate being bipolar and it's awesome. This is probably why he said it's a superpower. Like, I'm just trying to break down why Kanye said what he said. And yeah, it was it was a very, very struggly meeting for me. It's not a word, but I just made it a word. I was shaking, I was quivering, but it was also so liberating at the same time, because people have this idea of bipolar as it's all bad and you go crazy, and there's no coming back. Like, there are all these things that people say about it. And for me to sit down and be honest and authentic about, like, there are some beautiful highs, there's some spiritual nature here, there feels like, you're talking to God, like all these things people were not, like, prepared to hear. They were more thinking that I was going to sit down and be like, oh no, this is not right, or whatever they expected me to say. So the album itself, I also gravitate very strongly toward it. If I listen to anything Kanye related as well, it's that album. I also listen to The Life of Pablo as well pretty often. But Yay is, I don't know what it is, but that first song, I thought about Killing You, the way it comes in, it's just like, oh, like it just washes over me. And I'm like, this is the album that like changed my life in so many ways. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
That's beautiful, Kiana. It's it, it's always a special occurrence when a piece of art kind of reaffirms your experience or makes you feel
Yeah.
you're not alone. Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I, I'm a massive Kanye fan myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I wanted to talk to you about the kind of genius, crazy dichotomy that often occurs with artists, and definitely with Kanye. But before
Mm-hmm.
that, I guess did also did it make more sense for you when Kanye publicly came out with Bipolar? And I remember, I'm pretty sure either Kanye or his second name Omari is the chosen one or the only one in
Mm.
another language, I think. And it resonates with what you were saying about you feeling like you were the chosen one, even though you kind of knew you weren't the chosen one. And then obviously Kanye has a song called "I Am a God."
Mm-hmm.
Did things start to fall into place for you with that?
Yeah. Especially, so Kanye put out Yay in June 2018. So around April, I remember writing in my journal, um, some Kanye is bipolar. Like, I was like, I'm just waiting for him to come out. Like, that's literally what I was writing in my journal. Like, this was when, he was doing a lot of Trump related things, saying things about slavery on TMZ, but he was also having these other very, very, one with the universe tweets and thoughts and things that he was communicating. So I was like, I know what's going on here. Like, I didn't, like, I told maybe one or two other people who also live with like bipolar or who know people who live with bipolar. And they were like, we were just texting back and forth. Like, he said he's on Lexapro. Like, you know what that's about. He said this. We know that, it was like us like putting the pieces together. And so when he came out in June of that year, I was like, finally, like I review my journal sometimes, and I just looked back on one a couple weeks ago, and it was like me like writing about Kanye possibly being bipolar, and then him coming out and me being like, oh my god, he did it, he's out, and being like so excited because I knew that it was gonna like blast open every opportunity in order for me to like explain to people, this is what I'm talking about, this is what I'm living with. So yeah, it was a very exciting moment for me. Even though I know I shouldn't be happy about other people having a condition, but it's the relatability, like just having someone that you can point to and say, that
Yeah,
person gets me, or you can get me through that person.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess this links in nicely. I know something that's been on the forefront of my mind over the last while is the kind of like conditional nature of our kind of loving relationships, even with those who are closest with us.
Mm-hmm.
Like putting extreme acts of violence and deceit aside, I do see, like, in my opinion, a kind of a general level of like conditional love and acceptance within our overall
Mm-hmm.
culture, which can be like quite harmful for one's mental health. And
Yeah.
then obviously, like, I'm happy to use other examples but Kanye, but obviously he's a clear example of this. The kind of we love you when you make the Dark Twisted Fantasy album, but not so much when you act in this way where we frown. It's frowned upon to do that in public, and in both instances, here's a person who's being authentic, and in one way they're saying, "Yeah, we love that part of you, but we don't like that part of you," and I can imagine this is quite difficult to take. I mean, I guess we all part of it. We're all kind of censoring some part of ourselves, and I guess like this branch across a culture, we're almost encouraging ourselves to censor some aspect of our authentic self or our authenticity. And I guess I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, as I can imagine, like you've maybe considered, like or experienced, some maybe like conditional relationships, and like maybe how did this, like I guess you already explained how your family and your friends were quite supportive, but I'm sure there are other people in your life, or I'm sure like your friend has expressed this to you, where parts of you were praised or commended upon, whereas others were not, even though on both sides you're just trying to express yourself as the person that you are. And I guess I'd love to know, like how did this impact you, the way people treated you when you were just expressing yourself fully, and how do you think that we get to a better place overall with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a big question. It's a good question because I feel like we are very, very conditional in terms of like how we choose to accept people, how we choose to embrace them, and then how we choose to not. And I know we spoke about Kanye quite a bit, but he is like the prime example because we have looked at him for decades as like this incredible, like chosen artist, and someone who has done so much for the culture. And then when he comes out and he's open about like, hey, I have bipolar. He hasn't said what type yet, but I have a good guess. But yeah, he'll come out and he'll say like, I'm bipolar. I, get ramped up and I say things in the heat of the moment, and et cetera, et cetera. And people still sit here and say, well, you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have done that. Like, you should know better. And it's like, no, actually, like when you're going through the throes of mania, you can't really like comprehend what is coming out of your mouth. You're just saying whatever you want to say. So it's very much like how can we sit here and like commend and praise and elevate and exalt someone for being the full creative person that they are through this condition, but at the same time say, well, actually I don't respect you because you said something I didn't agree with in a moment that you couldn't control. And when I see that happening, I'm like, okay, so number one, what if that was me? Like, I mean, of course, I'm not like a super producer with millions and billions of dollars, but if the tables were turned, I feel like I would want people to understand me and want people to offer me compassion and grace. I get offered compassion and grace because I'm Kiana from around the way. I'm, the girl who everybody knows for being this person and for being kind and for doing all these other things. But when I flip into mania, like I turn into a different person who like is just completely like out there. And even in those moments, for the most part, I'm offered grace and compassion. But when it comes to figures like Kanye, it's like we don't have the ability to extend that to him. And that's what makes me wonder, like, so are these people really giving me grace and compassion? Are they faking the funk? Or is this like just a different situation because Kanye is Kanye? So I don't know. That's just like I have a lot of thoughts on that, but that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, Kiana, because one of the questions that I wanted to ask was, Kanye, obviously, he's almost created like his own world. He's his own producer. If he wants to, he can lock himself away in the studio for months at a time, and no one's there to really bother him. And if that happens when he's going through a manic, depressive episode, then that's his business. And and if he wants to go out on Twitter and say some what crazy stuff, then that's up to him. But for someone, quote unquote, a more normal person, in the sense that they have a boss,
Mhm.
they have a job that they have to go into 9 to 5 and so on. How does that, like, how there are,
Mhm.
I don't see that there's very many parallels there, because you know how does it work for you, for example, if you're in a manic state, can you just say to your boss, hey, like, I'm in a manic state, this might last like 2 weeks, and then how does that work? Are you still expected to come into the office?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point. And I, my own situation is I have had jobs where I've been going through something, whether it's like the triggering of a manic or depressive episode. And I like, but typically manic because, depression is kind of like not generalized now, but, it's more like everybody can kind of understand it. And mania isn't at that point yet, especially because there's a lot of like erraticism that comes with it. So whenever I'm going through a manic episode specifically, I have to tell my boss like straight up, like, yo, I'm not like I know there was a situation that I told my supervisor, hey, like I'm feeling very spiritual. I know what this means. I gotta take a break. And she of course was like, of course, anything that you need to do, we're here for you, like take your time. So I took the week off and I flew from New York to Texas and I stayed at home for a week and I just gradually came down and then I went back to work the next week and everything was perfectly fine. So I'm grateful that I've had situations in which I can be honest about like, like, hey, I'm about to go through it. Like I can typically tell when it's about to start. Now I can. So yeah, I'll just be vocal about that. And if they tell me like I don't think I've ever had anybody tell me no, you can't take time off. Like that would be some wild stuff. But yeah, in general, it's very not accepted, but yeah, I guess in a way it is accepted that I'm able to just raise my hand and say, hey, like I need a moment. And I'm very grateful that I haven't been rejected in that sense yet. Hmm. So there are two sides of the coin here. I remember, when I was having my episode in 2017 and I like went into work and I was given this assignment and it took me the whole day to write one piece, which is like not standard for me. I usually can knock a few pieces out in a day. And I like, as I was writing the piece, it just felt like I was writing about Jesus Christ. So I was like, I'm doing my best, but this is about Jesus and it's all coming out, it's all going down. Everybody's going to know how I feel. So in that sense, I wasn't able to really produce as much because I was just like super, super, super manic. But the piece that I wrote about Kanye and bipolar for Vibe magazine that Jim saw um, was something that I wrote when I was hypomanic. And I'm not ashamed to say it because I think that hypomania can be demonized in a lot of ways. And it's not necessarily always like oh my God, like you need help. Like sometimes it's like, you know what, I just wanna write, I just wanna write this piece and see what happens. And that's kind of what happened with that piece is I had like all of these different elements that I wanted to bring into it, and I wanted to be personal and I wanted it to do this and this. So yeah, in that sense, I feel like that piece was boosted because I was able to tap into my understanding of mania because I was in an elevated state, not in a manic state, but an elevated state. And I was able to say, okay, like I know what it feels like when I'm manic, and I know Kanye is probably feeling this way, so let me connect the dots in this way. But yeah, it was very much. It is very much. It differs. Sometimes I'm all in it, and I can like pour everything that I have into a piece, and sometimes I can't write anything at all because I'm so far gone.
Kiana, how has this? How have you come to grips with this in terms of like distributing your workload? And when was it the point where you thought, oh, an effective way for me to be able to spread awareness about this is through the medium of TikTok? So I have a feeling that somewhere these questions connect. I hope they do.
Yes. Oh man. Okay. So my close friend Laura, she like I said, we speak maybe like a couple of times a week, once a week. And she was just like, hey, like, we talk about this often. What if you talked about this on TikTok? Because she loves TikTok and she's very aware of the kinds of conversations that happen there. And I was like, sure. Like, I've never really thought about it, but I'll give it a shot since you think it's a good idea. Like, she typically has great ideas for me. So I'm like, you know what? I trust you. Let's do it. So I ended up just out of nowhere. I didn't have like a script or anything. I just like sat outside on my balcony and just recorded myself. And I was like, hey, I want to try something different here. Because before that, I was just doing like hairstyling videos. And like nobody was watching them. I was just like, oh, this seems like a fun thing to document. So I just came out and I was like, hey, I want to try something different. I want to talk about my bipolar disorder. And then I just ended up explaining the highs and the lows and, just told people like what it was and how I experienced it. And like within a day, it had like over 1,000 views. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is nuts. Like people actually care what I have to say. And I ended up making another video and then I made another video. And then I think that one, two. I think it was the third video that took off. And by that I mean like I went to sleep. Like I was like up at like 2 a.m. and I was like, I'm gonna make a video. So I just like made this video about mania and about like the synchronicities that come with mania and the experiences that happen with it. And like I went to sleep and I woke up and it had like 90,000 views. And I was like, oh, okay. So this is what people want to talk about. And as I was looking at the comments, I just saw so many people saying like, thank you. I've never heard anybody express what I go through so eloquently and so directly. And so like, there was like so much, the level of perception in it. I think people could understand that I wasn't just BSing them. I was actually being honest. And from there, like people have just been like, that video is at like over 700,000 views now. Another video that that I did about going to work while manic has over 400,000 views. So it's like people are very interested in what it means to be bipolar, and people who both are in it themselves or they just know someone who's going through it, they are very curious about like, what is it like for other people? Is it similar? Is it different? Like they just want to know about it. So that's kind of how things are going in that realm. I can't hear you. I think
Sorry,
you
I
were
was on
muted.
mute.
It's okay.
uh, sorry, what I wanted to ask was, were you surprised as a journalist that your content on TikTok was maybe reaching more people than your articles? And do you spend roughly the same amount of time in prepping the articles than you do prepping the videos?
That's a great question. I wasn't surprised that the TikTok content took off because I know that people just want the quick 1 minute video. People just want to see something and keep it moving. And with my articles, like I put a lot of time into them, a lot of research, a lot of personal excavation of my own experiences, and I just lay it all out there. And if people want to like read it, I'm more than happy to like direct them to that. But I know that in our current day and age, like people just want to move quickly. And if that means like looking at one video or going to my page and looking at every single video in a span of like 15 to 20 minutes and then being like, okay, now I understand bipolar people. Like whatever way people want to access it, that's up to them. But yeah, I wasn't surprised that that TikTok was the area that took off. And in terms of how much time it takes, so for an article like the Kanye one, or even other Kanye articles that I've written, I would say it takes maybe like, depending on how long it is, like 2 to maybe 3 or 4 hours. And for TikTok, like it depends on the day. Sometimes I can knock one out in like an hour and a half, an hour, and some days it'll take me 3 hours. And it just depends on like, do I have a script written? Do I have like, is my hair done? Just like anything like that, like anything where I have to just figure out like do all of the elements match up in this day? And if they don't, then I'll try it, and then I'm like, you know what, I'll try again tomorrow. But yeah, either way, it takes me some hours to do it, and I'm just grateful that people are giving me their time.
Yeah, it's funny because even I have a friend in work who says like she puts TikTok videos up of her dancing, and she says that like for every video that goes up, 17 videos never make it. 17 like
Yeah.
edits. The lighting wasn't right. This was a bit too
Yeah.
off, and this and this. Um, Can I have to ask, like, in your personal opinion, are you more optimistic maybe than you were a few years ago about the general understanding of bipolar and the acceptance of the consequences of this condition? Are you more optimistic having had a few years?
I'm absolutely more optimistic than I was 5 years ago. At that point, when I was first having my experiences, it was very, I've said this before, but it was very isolating. I didn't know anybody else who was going through it. I didn't connect with anyone. I didn't find any videos, especially people who look and live like me, like Black women, Black people in general, people from the South, people who, whatever. It was just like I hadn't seen my own experiences reflected back at me. And the more that I've put myself out there, the more that I've written about it, the more that I'm TikToking about it, I'm seeing way more people who look and live like me come out of the woodwork, and they're like, "Hey, me too, girl," or "My experiences was a little bit different, but I still feel you." It's very much. I think things are just an open landscape now. Like we can very much have dialogues and conversations about the things that we go through without feeling like, oh my God, people are going to judge me. Because, I'd never really, like, I had some shame for a long time based on the things that I did and tweeted and said. But that shame is nothing compared to the time that I've had being open about my experiences and being open about what I go through, because now people can understand, like, oh, Kiana wasn't herself when she said and did those things. Now we can like listen to Kiana in her present state and say, all right, she's lifted up, or she's done this, or she's done that. Like it's just a different time. And I'm looking forward to next year and 5 years from now where we can continue to like blow this open and just continue to have more and more open conversations. Yeah. I've tried both ways. So, as I mentioned before, I went off of medication shortly after my first episode. And that was mainly due to like, the whole skin issue that I was going through. So, that was an intentional decision. And within months, I ended up having another episode. And then after that, 2018 was the year that I didn't have a single episode. I had an elevation where I had to, when I mentioned earlier, I had to go home for about a week, and then I came back to work and everything was fine, but I didn't have to be hospitalized. And then 2019 is the year that I was the most inconsistent with medication. And that was the year that I was hospitalized two times within a 6 month span. So I've tried to not be on medication because I, you know, have feelings about mania that are positive. And I've tried, currently, I am on medication. I'm on Abilify, which is an antipsychotic, and I'm on lithium, which is a mood stabilizer. So I take those every day. And if I do have moments where I'm ticking up a little bit, my psychiatrist has said to double, well, I don't want to tell anybody what to do, but for me personally, he has said, to double my dosage of the antipsychotic, and then I'll come down. And then if anything happens, to take myself to a hospital and that kind of thing. But yeah, for me, I I'm on medication because I don't want my life to be disrupted, and I don't want to throw my family into a tailspin, because every time I have an episode, things fall apart. And I just don't want that to happen anymore. So it's more of like a responsibility thing, not because I want to do it, but because I know that everything is better if I just stay stable.
Thanks for that, Kiana. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to go back a little bit to the mania, because sorry, it slipped my mind about 20 minutes ago that
Mm-hmm.
your description of the mania is strikingly similar to some accounts that I've heard of someone experiencing special highs on psychedelics. And then you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned that recently you've really bumped up your interest in psychedelics and the experiences of plant medicine and this area. I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested. Have you had conversations with people who don't have bipolar but have experienced these highs as a result of psychedelics? And do you feel like they get you in a way that the average person who doesn't have bipolar and hasn't experienced psychedelics would not?
Yeah. So I have communicated with people who both have bipolar and have experimented with psychedelics, and then people who don't have bipolar and have experimented. So everybody in those groups, those are my people. Like they understand what it's like to experience some kind of ascension and go to, like another realm and feel like you're in touch with another entity or what have you. And yeah, so the people that I've spoken to who have bipolar and have experimented with psychedelics, they've said that like it gets you, psychedelics get you to the same place, but mania is much more powerful. It's much more in tune. It's extended. Whereas I'm assuming, I haven't done them myself, but I'm assuming that with psychedelics, it's a very limited time. So, I know people and I myself have gone through manic episodes for months at a time. And it's been outright glorious. And I know that, folks who've experimented with psychedelics have also been in that realm of wow, like everything makes sense and I understand who I am and my ego is dissolving and all these things are happening. It's very much of a similar ilk for me, especially like the first episode that I had. It felt like I deconstructed in front of my own eyes and I was built back up into this being that just understood everything. So yeah, when I hear people talk about their experiences or I do my research or I watch the YouTube videos and listen to the podcast and do all the things, I'm just like taking my notes like, okay, one day I'm going to be able to put this all together. I'm actually working on a big project right now about people's experiences through natural mania and through psychedelics, and I'm hoping to get more responses. But yeah, at this point I'm just trying to connect the dots and let people know that there is some overlap here, in terms of experiential exposures and the things that we go through and the places that we go to, like who's to say that the place that I've been isn't the place that my homie hasn't been. I think it's all kind of wafting in the same area. But yeah, I just have questions.
That's the same with me. I'm just looking for better questions. I'm not going to get the answer,
Mhm.
probably not.
Yeah.
But I wanted to bring up. I wanted to bring up. Um, so basically, I read about this tribe in Papua New Guinea recently, and they have a set of basic like initiations or ideas of development in the tribe or in the community, and I think there's 9, and the first 6 include various things, but nothing like plant medicine. But the last 3 include plant medicine, and
Hmm.
when the people eventually take the plant medicine, they after their experience they come back to the elders of the community and they express what they experienced and what they felt and all this, and the elders then say, oh, okay, we'll add this to the collective knowledge that we have of
Mm.
what God or what divine or all these things could possibly mean. And then I think of you in a notoriously stringent part of the country in terms of like what God could constitute, and I imagine
Hmm.
that perhaps you have experienced something that maybe might be a little different to what is being taught in churches or in schools. And I
Hmm.
wonder, have you had any communication with someone who has a pretty good idea what they think God is, not by experience, but by by learning or by listening to other people?
Hmm.
And yeah, have you had this communication? And if not, do you plan in the future? I would love to be involved in that conversation.
Wow, yeah. So I mentioned my brother who is schizoaffective, but he's very, very well versed in the Bible. And when I started to have these experiences and these synchronicities and all this stuff, I was just like, hey, I gotta talk to somebody. Like, can we talk about this? And he was very open. He was like, oh, well, that sounds like this part of the Bible, or that sounds like this. And he was able to help me connect the dots between what I was going through and what he knew from his education in that realm. So I have like dabbled a little bit in it, but like my uncle and my aunt are pastors at my church, and I would love to talk to them about about this. I would love to have like an open conversation about the things that I've experienced and what they've been, researching and educating themselves with their entire lives. I just hesitate because I don't know what they're going to say. And I don't want them to be like, oh, that's your illness, which is what everybody tells me anyway. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. But, I definitely want them to know about it because I feel like they know so much and they embrace me in every way. So I wouldn't be surprised if they found a way to embrace me through this as well.
I really hope so, Kiana. Yeah, and it's been fantastic to hear about your experience and your honesty. And I love your consistent transparency, which seems to have been like a key tenet of your progress, I would say. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. We'll be sure to include the link to your TikTok, the link of the Kanye article that I stumbled across, and any other links that you would like us to include. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. This was amazing. I appreciate you both. Thank you.
Hi guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you haven't already. Every review helps us climb the podcast charts so that even more of you can listen to our amazing guests. We really appreciate the support. Remember to tune in next week, but until then, keep safe and have a good one.